We now pause for snorting.
Yeah, really. Oh, jeez. This podcast is brought to you by Dristan.
This is the AT Banter Podcast, a balanced and entertaining look at assistive technology, accessibility, and its importance in people's lives. Join Rob Minot, Ryan Fleury, and Steve Barclay as they banter with people around the world about anything and everything regarding assistive technology and the disability community. Now, on with the show.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of AT Banter.
Banter.
My name is Rob Minot. Joining me today,
I'm Ryan.
Mr. Ryan Fleury.
Well, I'm Steve.
Guys are stepping all over my intro. What is going on? Ryan Fleury.
Hey.
And Mr. Steve Barclay.
Howdy. That's our co-host, Wheezy.
We are, yeah. I feel like I feel like this is like our first episode of the new year, officially.
No, we're not there yet. We're still struggling to get
I don't
there.
know, this year we've not been on our game this year. We've been struggling. We've been hit with snowstorms. We've got the plague. I had surgery.
Yeah,
We've had technical issues. It's just been a bit of a.
it's been a rough start.
It's
been a
rough
schmozzle.
start to the year.
Yep.
But hey, listen, we're still here. We're soldiering on.
Yes, indeedy. Oh, I got a story to tell you.
Go.
So, when we introduce ourselves, I was talking to our friend Shan out in Saskatchewan, the loneliest Canucks fan in Saskatchewan, and he was saying that when we do our intros, Ryan always says I'm Ryan, I always say I'm Steve, and you always say I'm Rob No. And he thought for the longest time that your name was Robino.
Oh my God.
It is now.
Is that right? Am I the only one that does that?
Yep.
Apparently.
Oh no. Well, look, what's wrong with you guys? Just say your last name. He's embarrassed to be on this podcast.
Well, we are on with a guy named Robino.
We give our last names when I'm introducing our guest. I say Rob Minot, Steve Barclay.
That's true.
But
Yeah. See, look at that.
yeah, well,
So there.
All right. Well,
Moving on.
We'll have to adjust that. I'm going to whip these guys into shape, get them used to.
Calling you Robino.
No, that's not what's going to happen.
yeah,
Yes, it is.
that totally is what's going to happen.
I hate you guys.
Hey, it's Shan. Blame him.
What's been going on with you guys?
Not much. Shoveling snow.
Fighting a cold. That's pretty much it for the last week.
Yeah, I've been recovering from surgery, so there you go. It is like a geriatric unit in here.
There you are.
Ryan,
Yeah, Rob.
well, what are we doing today?
Today we are talking with Jonathan Avila, who is the Chief of Accessibility at Level Access.
And what are we talking to him about?
AR and VR.
And what does that stand for?
Augmented reality and virtual reality.
Yeah, this will be cool. I really want to get a VR system.
Does it make you nauseous? Like, have you tried it?
I have a friend that has one. No, it doesn't make me. I never get motion sickness from anything. I know I have friends that can't even play like first-person shooters because they.
Oh, really?
They get. You're like that, aren't you, Steve? Don't you get a little bit of motion sickness?
No, not at all. Not from that kind of stuff. I mean, if I go out in a boat and it's rolling around out there, I'll get motion sickness, but I've never had it from a headset type of device.
Yeah.
Well, with augmented reality, you won't have that anyway.
That's right.
I guess augmented reality is a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of market penetration because Snapchat filters, all that kind of stuff's all considered augmented reality.
Yeah. I mean, even something as simple as Google Maps, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah. It's
Essentially.
true. Yeah, sure. But it'll be interesting to talk to somebody about how accessibility plays into both VR and AR because, again, I think everyone thinks of virtual reality as being a very visual medium and that, accessibility it just has no place in it. But you know what? 10 years ago, people thought the same thing about video games in general, and here we are, 2019. We have an Xbox adaptive controller.
Yeah.
Almost every game that comes out has some sort of an accessibility control scheme that allows people, certainly with physical limitations, to play video games just as well as anybody else. So by no means is it impossible.
Yeah, I think the Xbox you could also run narrator on as well and have access to some of the menus. So
Oh, is that right?
I was actually thinking I'm going to see if I can reach out and get somebody on to talk about consoles and accessibility.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That would make a really good show too.
Well, thank you.
You are doing something.
See what I
down
can
here on
do.
the Guitar Dungeon when we're not here.
That's right. Trying.
The wheels are turning.
Yep.
Okay, my throat's killing me. I'm gonna hack up a lung, so we better get to some news.
All right.
So, gene therapy first to halt most common cause of blindness.
Yeah, this is a BBC News article talking about a study being done in the UK with advanced age-related macular degeneration, and they're actually doing injecting a synthetic gene into the back of people's eyes to try and prevent the die-off of cells in the retina, or in the macula rather. So there's 10 people so far who have had this gene therapy treatment from Gyroscopes Therapeutics, and the article's kind of sketchy on exactly what all's going on, but it sounds like it's just the start of this trial. But it'll be really interesting to see. This is, I believe, the treatment that when we had a person on from Foundation Fighting Blindness, I think this is the one they were talking about, where they're actually putting genetic material into the eye, which will produce the drug, the protein that will stop the cells from dying. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see the outcome of this study, and see if it turns into a viable treatment.
Well, especially given that macular degeneration, I mean, is it not the most common age-related degenerative eye condition?
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah.
Well, they said this one is applicable to the dry macular degeneration. If you read down the article, I don't think it applied to the wet.
Basically, what they're doing here, Steve, if I've got this right, is that they take a gene and inject it into the back of the eye.
Well, it's actually a virus. They're putting a virus into the back of the eye that's carrying a gene, and will take that gene into the cells and essentially infect your cell with this gene. Infect is probably the wrong word, but it basically delivers this edited piece of genetic code into your DNA. And from that point forward, cells that have that gene produce the protein required to stop the
attacking genes
from destroying other cells.
Wow! Like, so if this actually works, this could be major. This could be one of the biggest medical breakthroughs in many years.
Yes, indeed, it could. It could also really screw with CCTV sales.
Yeah, they said that one of the test subjects was in her 80s, or was 80. So
Yeah.
Our prime population.
So this will definitely be something to keep an eye on.
No pun intended.
Oh, here we go.
Now, from the New York Times, galleries from A to Z sued over websites the blind can't use. On December 13th, a blind Manhattan resident named Henry Tucker filed federal lawsuits against 10 art galleries, saying their websites were not accessible to people who cannot see. The galleries' names included Adam Baumgold, Fine Art, Adelson, Agora, Alberts Benda, etc., etc. The next day, Mr. Tucker and his attorneys moved on to the bees.
So this is basically somebody who's doing blanket lawsuits.
That's right.
Of art galleries.
With some of the top suing litigators, it sounds like in the States. If you read down the article, these guys sound like this is what they do. This is how they make their business. One of the interesting things I took out of this article, though, was that they were saying that a lot of the websites, or a lot of people go to the ADA because accessibility is supposed to fall under that, and websites is part of that, but it says the ADA doesn't necessarily specify clearly what website accessibility is supposed to look like, which I found quite interesting. So, these lawsuits, yes, working with the NFB, have proven to have some effect in the past, but I'd like to actually see what the ADA Act says about web accessibility. Does that just mean that you have, high contrast? Does that mean it has to be, whatever, have audio descriptions of your grade? Yeah.
I would think that there's a solid foundation of at least an accessibility pass. I mean, you can tell a website that they've at least tried to make their website accessible. So things like alt tagging their images, laying out the pages with headings, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of things that they can do to at least make it look like they've taken accessibility into account.
Can you imagine the alt tagging for art, though? I mean, I've seen a guy stand in front of a blot and talk about it for half an hour, about the significance of it. I mean, alt tags for paintings could be massive.
But this is the website, though. Like, I don't think they're suing the galleries for their internal.
No. This is all web related.
Right.
But I guess what stood out to me about this article, though, that I thought would be interesting to revisit the conversation is, again, these lawsuits, because it's obvious that what's going on here. I mean, this guy's literally just going through the phone book or whatever, and let's sue art galleries, and just starting from A and going to Z, and that's what the article sort of points out as questionable. And at the end of the article, they sort of leave this question open: is this a human rights issue where we're trying to to bring some of these businesses into the accessibility fold, or is it just a money grab?
Well, you read the article here, it says, there's a statement there that says, a lot of these, end users that are suing these websites are getting, maybe hundreds of dollars after litigation's all said and done. The lawyers are walking out with thousands of dollars.
Okay, but
so money grab for a lot of them, sure.
But I disagree. I mean, a lawyer. I mean, look, lawyers are like anybody else. They should get paid for the work that they do. And so, sure, yeah, lawyers are making money. The plaintiffs probably aren't making all that much money. But I mean, that's okay. I mean, this guy that brought this suit against these art galleries, for example, he's not doing any of the legal work. So I think it's fair.
Okay, but again, we go back to and we don't know the answer to this. What is accessibility to you, and what is accessibility to me? This guy says it's not accessible. What wasn't accessible? The article doesn't say.
Well, the article
it doesn't. But I mean, there have been enough lawsuits, I think, at this point around accessibility of websites that there's probably a de facto standard that's been built over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. There are standards out there, and I'm sure, within these suits, they point to some of these standards not being upheld. I think that this is exactly what needs to happen for a lot of businesses to take accessibility seriously. And I'm sorry. I mean, litigation, we've heard over and over again, is really the main thing that gets businesses attention.
And I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'd like to see the fuller story. Did this guy approach the galleries? Did he work with them on making things accessible?
You know what?
There's companies to help do that.
It's not his job. It's not.
Sure,
it
is. It's our job to educate the public.
No, it's
yes,
absolutely not.
No,
it's not
I
our
agree.
job to.
I disagree.
It's not our job.
We talk about accessible products all the time, and we're out educating people on accessibility.
But
that's what we do.
It's not our problem.
It's what we do. That's right. It's what we do.
But it's not our responsibility to go to businesses and make sure that they're complying with a law. so they don't get sued. That's not our job.
When was the last time you went to an art gallery website to determine if it was accessible so that you could contact them and say, hey, your website's not accessible?
But if you're going to an art gallery, or maybe you're looking at going to an art gallery and you're doing a little bit of research and you find that maybe it's not accessible, wouldn't you want to reach out to them and maybe work with them to make it more accessible for everybody?
Not if I've got the option of reaching out to my lawyers and getting a
And
few
sue them
$100
first?
for it.
See, I disagree with that approach.
But really, that's the only way to get businesses their attention. They have to realize that when they're creating these entities in a public space, they need to be inclusive. End of story. There are laws that dictate that. And the fact that they're not complying with those laws because, well, they didn't know any better, it's too bad. It's 2019. Like, if it was 2002, then maybe.
Ignorance of the law is not a defense.
Correct.
We have so many businesses, even here locally, that if you went in and asked them what accessibility was, they couldn't tell you. We need to educate people.
Yeah, by suing them.
It's not
That's
the only
how they
answer.
learn.
It's not the only answer. Yes, that's how they learn, but that's not the only approach.
Well, it's not the only approach, but it's the most effective. And I mean, honestly, it's not like they are doing anything out of school. They are literally taking the law and applying it to businesses. And the fact that those businesses either were ignorant of the fact that they needed to have an accessible website, or they didn't care enough, too bad. Then you're gonna get hit with one of these. So
I'm sort of.
you seem to be in the middle.
Yeah, I'm somewhere between the two of you because one part I want to play devil's advocate because it's fun.
Sure.
On the other hand, there are practical ways of going about things, and this is pretty heavy-handed in my opinion. So I think Ryan's right. If he really had a beef with that website, he should have contacted them and said, hey, your website's not accessible. I'd like to get information. Here's a company that you could talk to about website accessibility. And then if they didn't do it,
Sure.
then, maybe go to the lawyers.
Maybe
And
they
maybe
don't
he
even
did.
know.
I don't know.
Well, that's just it. We don't know.
Yeah, this article doesn't actually say, but I like the last line of this article because it's just incredibly lazy on the part of the reporter. It's like, I don't care. It says, depending on one's perspective, the suits are either salvos for civil rights or a way for lawyers to scrape the internet for a quick paycheck. Well, that's great. That's a great conclusion. But why didn't you actually look into this a little deeper and, maybe interview the guy and say, hey, what did you do beforehand? Maybe, talk to one of the businesses and say, hey, did you see this coming? This is a really great example of just lazy reporting, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's going to be really interesting, later this year, if we get this Canadians Disabilities Act through, is that going to lead the way for more litigation in Canada?
It very well may.
It could.
Yeah.
It could.
Good.
So we shall wait and see.
Yeah, Ryan.
I knew I should have went to law school.
Ryan will be sitting down here with yellow pages.
No,
flipping through.
No, I'll be pointing people out to W3C Web Consortium guidelines, and if, like you say, there's other approaches first before you're calling the lawyers.
Okay, Rob, you and me and a lawyer.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm down. I'm ready. Me and Steve will be on the yacht.
Yeah,
We'll still be here in the guitar dungeon.
All right.
With your
guitars.
Yeah, with your guitars, and you're like, I'm going to teach the world to sing.
Hey?
Get out of the bathtub, Rob. It's my turn with the yacht.
I don't know. All I'm saying is we preach education all the time, and now you're flipping that and you want to litigate. So
No,
that's exactly what you just said.
Well, I think we've said on previous shows, the most important things are advocacy,
Yes.
That there be laws in place, and
Yes.
that people apply them.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, educate. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying that education isn't important. Certainly, of course, it's important, and of course, it's what we do. But there are businesses out there that just don't take the interest in making accessibility a thing because they either, the demographics aren't there for them. A company. It's frustrating when you think of it in terms of a company will plug money into search engine optimization in quotes for their website, or Facebook advertising for their website, or any sort of digital marketing aspect. They'll soak all kinds of money into that. But the idea of, I might have to redevelop the site a little bit and pay a developer, $1,000 to make my website accessible. Well, all of a sudden it's like, ooh, well, that's not a lucrative investment for them. And that's just got to change.
Yeah, for sure.
Boom. I win. I win. Ryan said, for sure. Let's stop there.
Okay. Yeah.
I got the original. I can edit that out.
Hey, Steve, why don't you tell the fine folks about Canadian Assistive Technology?
Well, Canadian Assistive Technology is a Canadian-based distributor of, guess what? Assistive technology.
I would not have guessed that.
Really? Oh, I got to work something better into the name then. And we do all kinds of low vision and blindness aids, as well as all kinds of physical access aids and accessible furniture. You name it. Visit our website at www.canastech.com.
Rick, let me ask you about this. Chaos Technical Services.
Chaos Technical Services.
Don't sound so excited about it. Woo! Speaking of repairs.
We are the sister company to Canas Tech. We do the repairs on low vision devices, reading machines, for libraries, Braille printers, and pretty well anything in between. We can be found at www.chaostechnicalservices.com.
Joining us now is Jonathan Avila, who is the Chief Accessibility Officer for Level Access. So, Jonathan, in the room with me is co-host Rob Minot.
I thought it was the host. I thought it was the host with the most.
Not today.
Just the co-host.
Just the co-host today.
Screw you, Ryan. Hi, hello.
Hello.
And we have Steve Barclay.
I don't have any title.
And I'm Ryan. So we want to thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Let's start with telling us a little bit about the company and what you guys do there.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Accessibility Officer with a company called Level Access. And Level Access is formerly called SSB BARC Group, which you may have heard of. Our mission is to empower people with disabilities to access all sorts of the digital world. And so we help organizations, businesses make their products and services accessible. So it's sort of the whole thing we do. I'm involved with the W3C. I'm on the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group to help make future standards for accessibility. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. So I've sort of come from before when accessibility was sort of an afterthought to now helping organizations build accessibility into their products from the beginning.
Which is exactly where it needs to be.
Bingo.
Okay, well, let's step a little bit into VR. Now, how long have you been sort of seriously looking at VR in terms of accessibility?
Sure. So it's been several years. Started originally with some federal government agencies looking at AR and VR as possibilities for training, that type of thing, emergency situation responses, and that type of thing. And of course, we had a lot of initial pushback, people saying, it's a very visual medium. This is, won't work for people who are blind, that type of thing. And of course, I see that as incorrect because all of the things that the system knows about the players and the environment and those details certainly can be communicated in different ways for people with different types of disabilities. So I'm looking at different modalities of communicating that same information. But essentially that information is known and is available. And actually AR and VR can not only be accessible, but could also be an assistive technology to help people. More recently, we have been working with organizations in the CVA space in the U.S. And the CVA is the 21st Century Communication and Video Accessibility Act. And it requires that any type of communication, whether it be two-way communication between humans, whether voice or text or real-time communication, et cetera, be accessible and accessible across the board people blind, deaf or hard of hearing, cognitive learning disabilities, motor impairments, etc. So organizations in particular who make games and other types of things that fall on the spectrum of immersive technologies reach out to us. And we worked with them to initially make those communication features accessible, or to explore the opportunities of making those features accessible. And so, like everything, gaming and other types of technology, there's really that social interaction aspect between humans. And AR and VR is no different when it comes to including those capabilities. So that's sort of where we're starting. And I hope that as we conquer some of those initial challenges and make progress, that we'll then be able to extend the accessibility beyond those communication features.
Now, I mean, and AR and VR are both fairly new technologies in terms of, in terms of the entire scope of things. Is that a bit of a challenge too? Because it's really still an evolving, it's still an evolving market.
Or is that maybe actually an improvement? Is it better that you're working at this from the ground floor?
So So essentially, it's an opportunity, but also at the same time a challenge, right? So when the iPhone came out, it was 2 years until it had screen reader built in. So there are, there's the benefit, so that the people who are working these are sort of very open to this idea and the areas that it could provide beneficial things in healthcare and education and other types of things. They see the benefit from an accessibility standpoint. At the same time, there's a competitive edge to get into the market, to release something by a certain date. And so there's also those challenges with accessibility could make them come into at a later date, could be additional time spent on that. So there, those are obstacles that we have to sort of overcome. And I think we've sort of made progress where we help people sort of prioritize some of the issues. So this is a great opportunity if you're building an API, which is an applications programming interface, to communicate, and you're looking at your product and you're thinking, all these things that can control my product and how it can be used. This is an opportunity for us to sort of look at those different ways that a person can interact with it, whether it be speech, or whether it be with a phone companion, or whether it be with a physical controller, or eye gaze or head movement, and then how the user can receive information back. So this is a great opportunity. And so what we find is that some of these technologies are actually already doing some really great things because they're supporting different types of interactions, which is a very positive thing. And so we can document that. And this is a great time for us to get into and say, hey, as you're building this API, this is something you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about things like the screen reader user needing to get text-to-speech and be able to navigate through the different elements on the screen. You should be thinking about the low vision user being able to enlarge things beyond just stepping closer to something, which would enlarge the items. That level of magnification is not going to be enough for most users with low vision. So this is an opportunity to think about building those components into the system at an earlier stage.
Well, it's interesting too because we deal with we're pretty familiar with a product called Iris Vision. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it at all, but it actually uses a VR headset and utilizes that platform to provide a low vision aid for people to be able to do the very thing that you're talking about, like to have on the fly magnification. So, I mean, there's all kinds of accessibility applications that not only VR itself can utilize, but the VR platforms as well.
So potentially you could have an Iris Vision virtual reality version where you step into your virtual reality and then you put on your virtual reality headset in virtual reality and then magnify what you're looking at.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, it is potential. Like you could with the example with ARs, you could put up a TV anywhere you want, so it could be at a preferred height or angle for you, or you could make it bigger and smaller, right? So there's lots of potential, and some of these devices even can project directly onto your retina, right? So if you have issues or challenges with the front part of your eye, they can sort of bypass those challenges and put the image directly onto your retina.
Wow.
So when you're looking at the whole spectrum of technology, it could certainly be very, very useful. There's a lot of different technology out there, such as IRA as well,
Sure.
which I think will be combining AR and also machine learning and artificial intelligence to solve some of these challenges. So I'm just thinking, for examples, your low vision example might be highlighting a path to an entrance, a door, or something like that. I mean, some of the challenges that the folks have is sometimes finding an address is one thing, but locating a specific entrance, whether it be at an amusement park to find the actual entrance for the ride, or to find a door, those things could guide the user to those locations visually, as well as with other audio or tactile cues.
So is that what really gets you excited? The fact that this technology is almost so new that we haven't even thought of all the different applications that we could be using it for.
Oh, absolutely. Right. So to me, it's exciting because it's that assistance with wayfinding. You could practice a route without having to go out into the environment to practice that route. There was an example, some folks had used a white cane with a motor on it to vibrate. And so the user could simulate going out in the environment, and as they encountered obstacles, it would vibrate the white cane. And obviously there's some challenges with that, being quite realistic, but it gives you the idea of how you could actually navigate through the tools that you're used to using through an environment and gain the practice for safely navigating, wayfinding, exploring areas virtually before you explore those areas. But it's sort of beyond that, because there may be areas that you can't get to for certain challenges, certain things that maybe you can't explore by touch because those things are too fragile. And so having a simulated environment where you could explore those senses and feel those items and experience the different perceptions, whatever it might be. We're talking about touch, but there's smell, and there's proprioception, and there's temperature and taste, and all sorts of other senses out there that eventually will be more mainstream in these technologies. And so it allows people to experience places that they might not normally otherwise be able to experience. So I think that's a huge aspect. And what also I think is very exciting is that people with disabilities can really go into these virtual worlds, and their disability is not apparent. They can choose to identify if they want to as having a disability, but they don't have to. So they can be, integrated into an inclusive, virtual, world, and don't have to be treated differently because they have a disability.
Right, and that kind of takes us into the sort of the gaming and the social interactions that can come with gaming.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so when you look at gaming, it is so very social today. If you look at young people coming into games, they expect a social interaction, and I've read plenty of gaming forums where people say they won't even buy a game that doesn't have a social aspect to that game.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very big part of thing. And it's not even just young people. I think the average age of a gamer is like 35 years old. There's people who have all ages and abilities playing games, and it really connects people. People need that entertainment and that social relationship to de-stress and unwind and that type of thing. So I think I definitely see this communication aspect being very, very big. And so, we're seeing, initially we had avatars in an online world,
right,
and now we're using AR and VR to sort of take those avatars and animate them and emote them into your character, how you want to be seen with other people, and communicating your body actions, through the virtual world to other people. So there's a lot of potential out there for how things go, and we just need to make sure that those different aspects can be communicated in different ways. For example, if there's visual type of communication, body language, that information can be communicated to people who can't see that, or if someone who is deaf or hard of hearing is not able to speak, that they can be able to type, and that could be translated into their voice that represents them to communicate with other people.
How big of a challenge is it to really make these spaces accessible?
That's sort of a complex question. It depends on the type of technology that's being used. It depends on some of the frameworks being in place, right? So initially, we don't have a lot of those frameworks in place that contain, so just beyond like the social aspects, in order to get to that aspect, right, of communicating or playing a game, you actually have to be able to put on the headset. You have to be able to configure it to you. You have to be able to set it up and create an account and log in and do all these other things that are required. And so that process is something we have to sort of work with first. And then, as I mentioned before, with this API, we sort of have to make sure that, okay, well, great, it's useful that you can use voice chat, and maybe that's accessible to someone who's blind, but how are they going to activate that voice chat? And how do you get from step A to B in that system? Well, you need to have that internal structure that would allow, because these platforms generally aren't using something where you could use a typical screen reader like you might expect for Windows or VoiceOver on the Mac, to just pull that into this environment. These environments are often very, different. And so you would have to build that capability in first to support that type of navigation, to support that type of speech or other type of feedback, Braille or whatever it might be. And so when you build in those capabilities, then you can start building on top of that. And a lot of these platforms that are coming out, they're not only a game or a product, but they are a platform that other games and products and apps will be built on top of. So making sure that we get accessibility into these platforms is really key. And that's been a similar challenge that we've had with the gaming environment. You have different engines like Unity or Unreal that are used for the gaming, making sure that we get accessibility into those engines and into those frameworks so that other apps can then take advantage of them. Sort of in the gaming world, the Xbox is a great example of something where Microsoft built a lot of accessibility in. They built some of these back-end services that then when apps can then take advantage of those services to make things more accessible by either text-to-speech or translating speech to text and so forth.
It's very much an evolving field right now. I mean, we have several different VR platforms that really, I don't know. I don't know if any of them have really penetrated the market to the degree that the developers have hoped. I mean, we've got the Vive, we've got the Oculus Rift. Is that correct? Yeah. We've got the PlayStation, the
VR gear.
I can't think of any others, but I'm sure there are. I mean, there's of course the lower value ones, right? The ones that just use a smartphone.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, there's all these varied platforms that are still kind of, shuffling to try to really have market dominance. Is that a bit of a challenge right now because you sort of don't know where to put all your energies into?
Certainly is a challenge convincing all of them that they need to invest in accessibility, and that the investment will be worthwhile and is necessary. And that's where I think with the communication thing in the US, with CVA, there's potential fines for the communication features not being accessible. So there's a really, from a legal standpoint, there's an interest in making those parts accessible. And so that regulatory aspect has been helpful. Unfortunately, in the accessibility space, it almost takes regulation or sometimes litigation in order to drive the industry forward. So we haven't seen as much progress in other areas before that. So it's certainly a challenge. The mobile device challenges, as you mentioned, those devices as they are maxed out, with the VR, and so putting an assistive technology on top of that, could affect performance, right? So there are real challenges that have to be solved, especially in some of these lower end ones. And I don't have all the answers, but I think the first step is awareness, right? Just communicating to these different groups, the awareness for this. And there's different approaches. Like some of the groups like Able Gamers, they really take the approach that it's not so much, we don't want to threaten litigation or regulation. We want to work with you to make things accessible for people with disabilities, and have users provide feedback and communicate in a very structured way to get these things built into the products. And I think it will take time. If we see a major player coming out with something that is accessible, I think that may help to drive the others in the industry. So it's been my experience that when one organization does something well, the others will look at that and try to emulate that and follow that. And so I think if we get that one thing happening, that'll make progress for everybody. Microsoft has demoed some of the virtual reality things that had accessibility. For example, at the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference, they had an audio game where you would travel through a 3D world, and you would use spatial audio, 3D audio, to sort of navigate and get information. And so they were able to demonstrate that type of thing with the Microsoft Mixed Reality, which is formerly HoloLens. And it was neat to see those types of things. But at this point, it seemed like a lot of those games are more at the research stage. They are not necessarily at the formal stage that we would hope.
Sorry, Rob, I was just going to jump in for a sec.
Go for it.
One of the questions I have is, when you hear the term accessibility, your mileage may vary from company to company. So when it comes to AR and VR, are there actually guidelines, specified that companies need to follow? Well,
so there isn't for accessibility. There isn't specifically ones, right? But I mentioned back to the CBA. There's what are functional performance objectives. So they basically say a person with this type of who is blind or low vision, or a person with color perception challenges, everything has to be operable, or the same information has to be available. Now, beyond those functional guidelines, there are guidelines for games that are sort of voluntary that people have been putting out there. So there's the International Gamers Development, IGDA. They have a set of game development guidelines or checklists. There's a game accessibility. So there are some folks who have done similar things for games. Now you would sort of have to take and extend that to the VR AR world. We also, of course, have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which many people think are just for web, but they really can be applied. A lot of the principles can be applied beyond web content, beyond software, to these worlds. I think really what we're talking about, though, is we need to have this planning phase where we're actually architecting a screen reader and assistive technology features from the ground up. So we're looking at things like at the platform level, we need increased contrast. We need text to speech. We need some sort of navigation, be able to navigate through items and be able to say what order things are in, right? So if you think about the same types of challenges that Apple had when they introduced accessibility onto the Mac OS, or that Windows had when they introduced accessibility onto the Windows platform, those are some of the same types of challenges that you'd be incorporating. Now, of course, we can build off of those earlier experiences. So it would definitely be faster at this point to do that.
I think the one example to look back to is, the advent of the smartphones. When Apple first, came out with the iPhone, you looked at it and went, it wasn't intuitive at all. It was like, this is not going to be an accessible device. But they went ahead, they cracked the code on how to make that device accessible, and everybody else followed suit. And now, you buy a smartphone, and out of the box, it's probably one of the most accessible devices out of the box that you can possibly purchase. So in a way, you transfer that to the idea of VR, and really all you really need is that one VR platform to sort of take the lead. And again, emphasize the importance of having it accessible out of the box, and everybody else is going to follow suit.
Right. And there's certainly, I think what was nice about the mobile environment is that it was, in some sense, people started over with the user interface, right? Yeah. They took a simplified user interface that had less items on it, was more straightforward. And so, many people prefer to use their app or their device because of that. Right. It's just easier to get what you need. It's more contextual. And I think that AR and VR could certainly be that as well. If you think about all the contextual uses of this technology for people with cognitive learning disabilities, as they're performing a job, getting that contextual help of like, here's the next step, here's where you push this button or take this to this location, that just-in-time information and sort of like a heads-up display type of thing will be very beneficial to that group of people. And I think it's important, like when we think about disabilities, a lot of people have multiple disabilities. So you may be blind or visually impaired, but have an additional disability as well. So we should really be thinking about that type of situation and how people access things. I also think we have the combination of technologies now. So if you look at the Internet of Things, a lot of these things are generally controlled by your smartphone. So it may be that even if you have a dedicated AR VR system, you may be able to input information from your smartphone, which is already accessible, into that AR VR system.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, I would assume that that's just going to be a certainty in the future. I mean, that's just the way that things are headed, I think. Now, is it a little bit frustrating when you talk to people? Because I feel like whenever I talk to people about VR and AR, people automatically just assume that it's gaming. That's really the only component of either VR AR, because mainly that's just been the historical usages of it mainly. Is it a little bit frustrating because there are so many more potentials? I mean, I've heard of them using VR for Alzheimer's patients to help with dementia, medical imaging, medical diagnoses, like you said, the idea of virtual mobility and orientation. There's so many applications for this, yet people just seem to go straight to that's just for video game nerds.
I think it depends who you talk to, right? So the people who maybe only seen the video game aspects, or that's been their experience, that's where they're coming from. But if you talk to the people who really are in this space, I think they're going to see the other potential. They're going to see healthcare. That these devices are going to be used by surgeons to augment the surgery or to practice the surgery beforehand. They're going to be using this type of technology in the military. They're going to be using it in education and classrooms. So I think the folks I've been in the industry, I think are seeing the potential beyond gaming. And so I think that's going to be a big area. And that's also good for accessibility though, right? Because most educational institutions have some accessibility requirements. Healthcare, certainly if it has federal funding involved in the U.S., is tied to some accessibility requirements as well. So I think that may help. I mean, there's all sorts of apps that we're seeing these days, like to help people take their medication in sort of an augmented reality one to sort of make sure they're putting the medication in their mouth the correct way and taking the correct dosage. And so we're going to see more and more in the healthcare space.
So, and I don't know if this is going to be a question that you're going to be able to answer, because it might be a little bit too much in the development technical side of it, but just as an opinion, as somebody who works really closely in this space, what's preventing VR and AR from really becoming ubiquitous and just sort of everywhere like smartphones are? Is it just that the technology isn't quite there yet to really have this one platform that just penetrates the mainstream market, or is it just that, you know, the developers haven't developed that one magic operating system that's going to draw everybody to it?
So I've seen it sort of like a phased approach, right? So if the first was sort of like the gaming, and there was some, you know, advanced uses in medicine and military, but where we started seeing it come in next is with you know, AR and mobile phones, where you could drop things into an environment to make videos, or for gaming like Pokemon Go, or even for communication with your friends. And people have mobile devices. It's not an extra thing. So AR in that environment was probably, you know, the first phase.
Right.
And I think there's certainly challenges with performance. There's challenges with cost. I mean, if you look at all the things that have come out from Google Glass to, there was a big manufacturer who had, you know, a sort of a heads-up display glasses, and they, you know, canceled the program on that. And I think it was about they didn't think the market was there to sell it, and so this type of solution would like pop up contact information, you know, calendars would tell you where the nearest coffee shop was in your glasses, and I think that's where things are moving. But they, you know, the impression I got was from the standpoint of return on investment, it wasn't there for them, and so I think there's that barrier that organizations are trying to break, and I think they're close to breaking that. And once they get to that point, these things will be very ubiquitous in our society, and I think this is the way things are going. It's just been a little bit slower than a lot of us had hoped. There's been challenges with the field of view being wide enough with some of the technology, because the processing power and the battery life and all those challenges. So it does take a lot of money and research to overcome some of these challenges. There's also been challenges with some of the VR making people feel nauseous, and there's types of things. So they all have to be, you know, figured out and addressed.
So Jonathan, do you know of any apps or samples of accessible AR, VR that people can actually take a look at?
A lot of the folks we're working with, we're not at the stage where it's, you know, publicly available.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're doing a lot of the behind the scenes type of work. And the same thing in gaming, right? I mean, we're sort of really making that shift to accessible gaming, and we see people making some progress. There's examples of some things that people are doing well. You know, you can point to hey, this one aspect is really good here, but then another aspect isn't as good. But then there's other product here that has some progress as well. And I would just say the products that tend to allow for multiple modes of input and output are the best, right? I mean, simply relying off of eye tracking, or relying off of, you know, even the ability to have two eyes. You know, apps need to be able to support different methods of interaction, whether it be moving your head, using a controller, using a mobile phone, connecting a physical keyboard, you know, gestures, you know, performing gestures in the air, right? I mean, there's lots of different ways to interact. So I really see the folks who are supporting multiple methods of interaction, multiple methods of receiving information, both auditorially, visually, and through other methods, are the ones that are going to be most successful.
Well, yeah, you know, it's interesting, and we talked about this a few weeks ago when we were talking about, I think, the latest CES show. You know, the HTC Vive was showcasing their newest model that had eye tracking built into the device, and we were talking about that, saying that, you know, it's kind of amazing, because eye tracking is, it has been a staple of assistive technology for years and years. And here they are. They have it built into this new model.
Mainstream device.
Yeah, a mainstream device, which could have far-reaching accessibility implications for a device that's built off the HTC Vive. Do you find that? Do you find that some of these developers are just including things that, have amazing potential that they don't even realize?
Oh, absolutely. We see this with AR, VR, and gaming, that developers have introduced a lot of features, and these features turn out to be really good, right? So if you have a controller, making sure that, you can remap buttons on the controller. And I know that sort of applies to games, but it applies to VR as well, right? Supporting different methods of access, like, oh, well, we support Bluetooth and you can connect to keyboard. So in theory, you could, control it through the keyboard. So having some of these built-in technologies, or they had built-in Bluetooth capabilities for, supporting integration with a phone, and whatever it might be, SMS or any sort of technology like that. Those capabilities, potentially are very important. So we see, game manufacturers all the time building in these things and not realizing how really helpful they are to people with disabilities.
So, and this you may be unprepared to do this, but can you just give us a taste of some of the different things that you see AR and VR being able to do for, say, somebody who's blind or visually impaired? Like, one of the things that springs to my mind is, say, facial recognition, for example. Mm-hmm. For somebody who's blind or visually impaired, if there's facial recognition software built into, say, something like glasses, smart glasses, that can identify people and tell you who's in front of you. What other kinds of things?
Bill is in front of you. You owe Bill $40,000. Turn and run.
Well, I think for, it's beyond people who are blind and visually impaired, but for people with autism, that a recognition of emotion in other people.
Yeah.
So these things, when combined with the machine learning and the Watson type technology, I think really, if you look at some of the things that IRA does, for example, that right now they're using humans to do, right? Those will be taken into machines will be doing those in the future, and there'll be additional feedback that'll make it more of an AR experience, where they're going to sort of take your current reality and lay in the augmentative reality on top of it. And so those clues will sort of be part of what you're getting. So I see all sorts of things, from travel to, preparing people for, any sort of daily activities, whether it be cooking, or enhancing the experience. Facial recognition is certainly a good one. Travel challenges are abound with hazards that come up temporarily, right? So you might be able to build into some instructions, like you would have with Google Maps. You can build in walking instructions, right? But there's construction, there's piles of snow, right? There's all sorts of things that come up as you're in your daily life, and being able to have something that could identify them, sort of overlay some sort of alternative route to you, and provide you those instructions. I think is a real thing for people with low vision. We started to go down that route of certainly augmented. You've probably seen some of those technologies where if you have macular degeneration, you have a scotoma where there's no vision in one part. They're actually taking what you might see in that area and displaying it in another part of your vision to sort of stitch together the whole world in your usable vision that you might not or otherwise normally be able to see.
Yeah, and I would think that the education space would be a huge one as well, which makes the idea of building in an accessible UI and platform to be even that much more important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anything from accessibility or education space, whether it be science or biology, for students to experience the different things. I even had someone approach me about the 3D maker movement and how that, has been less accessible for people with disabilities, in particular people who are blind or visually impaired, to experience that. And how could you take a 3D object and communicate that, audibly or through tactile means that could help the user experience that and be able to make their own things, with 3D technology. No, I mean, just my personal opinion is just looking at these shows like CES and things is just making sure that we just keep people aware of accessibility,
Right.
and the inclusiveness of why we're doing it, right? And just, I think we've got to overcome. It's like some people don't realize there's a problem, right? They don't realize that someone's being left out,
Right.
and they would be willing to, build this technology. And some folks don't understand the challenges, and so when they see when they think about someone who's blind using this product, they go, "Oh, this can't be done," but we start sometimes with the smaller pieces when we're dealing with accessibility. So let's just start with color and contrast and think about things that people may be more familiar with, like contrast or someone who's colorblind. And we start, okay, then we move to something else, and we start building in accessibility layer by layer. And so they're introducing it slowly. And then you get them thinking, and then they get excited about, some of these things that are, maybe a little bit more work to solve, but we sort of make progress by that. That way people tend to be in a little bit put off at first. Just like anything, like accessibility of comic books or any other sort of medium that seems really difficult to make fully accessible for everybody. If you start in smaller pieces, then eventually you can show them the whole picture.
And do you feel like that conversation is a lot easier to start these days?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just in the space that we're in, like even 5 years ago, we wouldn't have had, retailers and hospitality and travel and all these other people who are now very interested in accessibility, in general. We wouldn't have had them 5 years ago. I mean, initially when we started, it was the government who was concerned about accessibility, and that was really driving. And there was some in the education space, but they didn't have a lot of money. And now, like, all sorts of organizations are really interested in accessibility because of litigation or because it's the right thing to do, that type of thing. And the one area that we kind of skipped with AR and VR was retail. There's definitely going to be sort of that synergist between, AR, you're going into a store and you're going to be sort of maybe directed, or your experience is going to be enhanced by using the technology. And I think retail will be a big area. And because that industry has been very susceptible to litigation, that could be another area that we see, progress with AR.
Yeah, I mean, and again, to bring it back to gaming, look at the Xbox and the adaptive controller. 10 years ago, those things existed, but there usually some guy had built a Franken controller in his garage that was sort of adaptive. But Microsoft, to their credit, they went out and they developed one, and it got a hugely positive reception.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you see a change at Microsoft because of Nadella, and he has a child with a disability. And so that we see that a lot in organizations where they have person experiences disability firsthand, and suddenly there's a change of culture and commitment within an organization to sort of look at this. And so they have funded the adaptive controller and work with the able gamers, and it's a great piece of technology that's now mainstream. And in that sense, you can connect it to your Windows 10 machine. It's not just on the Xbox, and I've even heard of people connecting it to the Nintendo Switch and all sorts of things, right? So the possibilities are really endless when organizations sort of embrace that approach and take that inclusive stance. So it's been really great to see the progress that's been made by Microsoft and the Xbox platform.
Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. For anybody who's interested in what you guys do over there at Level Access, where can people find you?
Levelaccess.com is our website, and we pretty much do anything digital accessibility related. So any services, auditing, consultation, strategic policy, working with organizations to sort of embed accessibility in. And we really strive to help, the wireframe, the design level, design systems, all the way through the, continuous testing, integration by developers through the life cycle of a product. Not just, not thinking about accessibility at the end of the QA phase. That's way too late. And so we do a lot of that. We also make tools to help organizations manage accessibility. So we have a platform that manages, helps organizations at an enterprise level track accessibility of all their assets, whether they be web or mobile apps. We also make testing tools. So we sort of have the whole gamut of digital accessibility.
All right, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Have a good day.
Bye.
I love VR. I wish they would figure this technology out, because I just want a VR helmet.
Well, it's going to be interesting because at Mobile World Congress, I think coming up soon, or Build, one of the two conferences, Microsoft's releasing the new HoloLens, the HoloLens 2. And so it's going to be interesting to see what features it incorporates, because they are also working on, like with the first HoloLens, you had an external controller you used to interact with objects.
Right.
They're working on being able to just interact with objects using your hands,
Yeah.
not having to use a controller. That would be really cool. So we'll see what comes. But I'm excited. I just want to try some of this AR stuff.
I think part of the problem with the technology is it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because it's still very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
To buy a VR system you're still looking at, I think probably the cheapest one out there is the one that you just attach to a PlayStation. And I think that's still like between $300 and $400. The other, like the Vive, the Oculus, I mean, you need, not only do you need the headsets itself, but you also need a really good computer to run it properly. So it's expensive. I mean, you're talking, north of, $1,200-$1,300. And that's just, for a lot of people it's too expensive for a gimmick, which is what, to be honest, what a lot of people still see virtual reality as. And as a result of that, because the numbers aren't there, of course, there's not as many people developing apps or games for those platforms. So there's nothing really to draw the people in. So it's, it's a bit of a catch-22. So I think what really needs to just happen is that the technology needs to get to the point where they can bring the price point down, where it's just like, you know what? I'll spend $300 on this.
Well, it's roughly analogous to console gaming when console games were first coming out, right?
Yeah.
Like nothing was really that popular until somebody came out with a console that had a lot of different software for it.
Right. Yes.
And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take somebody to come out with a headset that's got a ton of software.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's still very, very much a new market, but somebody will crack the code eventually. Hey, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Well, that was really low key. Let's try that again.
Hey, Eeyore.
Yeah, really.
Yellow poo.
Hey, try it again with feeling. Hey,
All right.
Ryan.
Rob.
That's way better.
All right.
Where can people find us?
atbanter.com.
They can also drop us a line at cowbell@atbanter.com.
Woohoo, I won.
You did.
Yay.
Wait, let's do that again with the...
With the cowbell.
They can also drop us a line at cowbell@atbanter.com. Damn. That was worth the 2 days that it took.
2 days. It was like 3 or 4.
to get Code Eddie to get that damn thing working. Where else, guys?
Facebook.
You guys are out of practice.
I'm tired. I've got a cold. I've got things I need to do.
They can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Yay. They can also find us at their nearest walk-in clinic.
Oh, right. Okay, well, we're old and tired.
Sick and tired.
Wow.
Sick,
There's a
tired,
geriatric unit in here.
It really is. We'll get into that. All right, everybody. Thanks again for listening in, and we'll see everybody next week.
This podcast has been brought to you by Canadian Assistive Technology, providing low vision and blindness solutions across Canada. Find us online at www.canasstech.com. That's CANASSTECH.com. Or call us toll free at 1-844-795-8324. For all your assistive technology servicing needs, call Chaos Technical Services at 778-847-6840 or find them online at chaostechnicalservices.com. Music provided by bensound.com.
Whoa, look at that. Master of the one take.